Hi, my name's Penny, and as usual, I'm here to talk about some bookish things. Specifically today, I wanted to wrap up all the books that I read in September, which was actually 25 books. So, pretty pleased with myself, although I still didn't read all the books that I was planning to read in September, but life happens. I did also manage to read 9 books off my physical TBR shelves, which means that list is now down to just 70 books. It's still a lot, and I'd like to get it down a lot more, but we're making progress, which is good. Unfortunately, I did have quite a large percentage of 2-star books this month, and I don't know whether that's normal because I just started collecting my stats a bit better this month, but I hope it's not normal. I hope this isn't what things are always like. I don't think so. I think just because I was tidying up my TBR lists, it meant I read some books that were always going to be a bit of a risk as to whether I'd like them or not. So that's life. So since I read 25 books, I better hurry up and just get into telling you about them. As usual, I'm going to go from worst to best. Unfortunately, that means it will take a little while till I get to the good ones. So just skip to halfway through the video if you don't want to hear me talk about the books that I didn't enjoy. Okay, so let's start with the worst book that I read in September, and that is Sea Witch Rising by Sarah Henning. This is the prequel to Sea Witch, which was like an Ursula origin story, and then Sea Witch Rising is, or at least I thought it was going to be, the Little Mermaid story told from the Sea Witch's perspective. And it kind of was, but unfortunately a lot of it was also told from the Little Mermaid's sister's perspective, which really wasn't that interesting, and also the Sea Witch part didn't make a lot of sense, so unfortunately I only gave this 2 stars, just like the next 8 books that I'm going to talk about. Then I listened to the audiobook of At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. So this I listened to for the Tome Infinity Readathon because I needed to read a book set in Antarctica. This is all about the scientific expedition to Antarctica where they discover some monsters. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get on board with the classic writing style, and I felt like there wasn't enough to the story beyond just the discovery of these monsters. Then I listened to the audiobook of Stronger, Faster and More Beautiful by Arwen Ellis Dayton. This is a science fiction short story anthology, although all the different short stories are kind of linked together as society gets more and more messed up based on different political stances around genetic modification. I think for me, I was just hoping for something a little bit more extreme in the science that it talked about, and also a little bit darker. I do think that the way it looked at the political ramifications of genetic modification and people taking strong stances on genetic modification was quite well done. I just didn't think each story really stood up on its own, and I didn't really care about the characters in the second half of the book. Then I read the first book from the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences series by Pip Valentine and T. Morris, Phoenix Rising. This is a steampunk fantasy set around the 1900s, and we follow a couple of not very good agents who are part of the Ministry of Peculiar Occurrences who basically work for the government and go and stop dark magic from causing trouble. I really wanted to love this because Pip Valentine is a New Zealand author, although she lives in the States, and I've read some of her books before that I've really loved. Unfortunately, I just found this quite cheesy and just trying a little bit hard to be clever while not actually having much substance to the plot. And I think it was particularly frustrating because I was trying to read the whole thing on the last day of the Tome Infinity Readathon, and when you're trying to read a whole book in a single day, you really want to be enjoying it a lot more than I enjoyed this. Then I also read Third Degree by Tanya Roxburgh. I picked this up in a book fair a couple of months ago because Tanya Roxburgh was my sixth form drama teacher, and I just wanted to see what kind of book my sixth form drama teacher would write. Turns out she writes a book that seems very much like it was written by an English teacher, which is not a surprise because she's an English teacher. It turns out that this is a very autobiographical story. It follows a girl who, when she was younger, had an accident in the home and ended up getting third-degree burns over a significant part of her body and spending a lot of time in hospital because of that. And it also tells the story of when she's older and she's having to deal with having the scars from those burns, as well as the resulting difficulties in her relationship with her mother. In the end, I just didn't think that the different plot lines fit together very well. There was also also a plot thread in there around the children having been given medication in the hospital without their parents' permission, and that didn't really seem like it fit in with the story either, although from the author's note it seems to be what happened in reality, which was interesting, but it wasn't that interesting in the story. Then I also picked up Chinese Cinderella by Adeline Yen Ma, the secret story of an unwanted daughter. This was okay. It is written very simplistically, but then it is a middle grade, so that makes sense. This was a reread for me, and I found it interesting that on this particular reread, I don't know if it's just because I've gotten older, but I felt like a lot of the things she was saying were so terrible in her childhood weren't actually that terrible. She definitely has some terrible things that happen to her, and her parents aren't very caring, especially her stepmother. But she made out like everything in her life was so terrible, and there were a lot of things that really just weren't that terrible, especially in the context of what was happening in China at the time that this is set. I do think this has some interesting stuff in it about Chinese culture, but just overall, I didn't enjoy it as much as I was expecting to. Then I actually read both the first and second volumes of this Avril Levine graphic novel series, Make 5 Wishes. And it's only the second volume which is down this far on the list in terms of rating. And the main reason for that is just that the ending was so 100% unsatisfying. I honestly thought there must be another book, and I went to try and look it up, but no other book exists. It just ends completely unfinished, in my opinion. I'll tell you more about it when I get to the first one and I'm feeling more positive. Then I read Legion, The Many Lives of Stephen Leeds by Brandon Sanderson. I have a lot of respect for Brandon Sanderson, so I was expecting a lot from this, but unfortunately I just couldn't connect with the main character. In this story, we have this main guy called Stephen Leeds, and he has some kind of mental issue where he has lots of different aspects of himself or different personalities, and he can see these different personalities and talk to them, and for him it's almost as if they're real. And to focus them, he goes and solves different kinds of cases and uses his different personalities' skills in order to solve these cases. Unfortunately, while his different personalities were quite interesting people, he himself was really boring, and there was a subplot going on through all the different novellas. So this is 3 different stories wrapped into one, and there's some kind of story going on about his ex-girlfriend Sandra, hinted at through the stories, but when that finally came to fruition, I was just really disappointed that there wasn't more to it. I also thought it just seemed very convenient the way that he solved the cases. He just happens to have this new personality that's able to figure out everything that he needs to know in order to solve it. I don't know, it was okay, but I was just expecting something much more amazing. Then we have Death Note 8. So I've been reading the Death Note series for quite a while. This story follows a guy named Light Yagumi who finds this Death Note, which is the notebook that belongs to a death demon. When you write the name of someone in one of these notebooks, that person dies. And you can also specify how they die and a lot more information. I do really love this series, but this particular volume went in a direction that I didn't enjoy as much. Now, this has happened before in the series, so I'm hoping that it will get back on track. I only have another 4 volumes to read before I finish this series. I'm hoping to read them in October. I really hope the series redeems itself, because if it keeps going like this, I'm going to be disappointed in the end. Then I listened to Her Pretty Face by Robin Harding. This is a domestic thriller, and I have come to realize that I don't really like domestic thrillers. I don't think this was a bad domestic thriller. It's just that I get quite frustrated with how dysfunctional people in domestic thrillers seem to be. And it really makes me worry that this is what a lot of people are living their lives like. Try to be less dysfunctional, people, especially when it comes to relationships. I cannot believe that people don't have better relationships. Don't stay in relationships if they're like the relationships in domestic thrillers. They're not good relationships. So basically, what is the story even about? A woman struggles to make friends with the other mothers in her son's fancy school, and a daughter runs around trying to get into trouble. I don't know, maybe I should look at the actual synopsis. Basically, not much really happens. There's a lot of hints. There is a bit of a drama, but in the end, not much really happens. People are just really dysfunctional. Then I listened to The Cure by Basma Abdel Aziz. This is by an Egyptian woman, and I read it for Africa for the Tome Infinity Readathon. To be honest, I read it at 3 times speed, which is not the best way to decide whether you like a book, or at least it's a little bit fast for me, like about twice as fast as I like to listen to audiobooks. I thought it had some really intriguing ideas, but I did find there were quite a few characters and I struggled to keep track of them. But again, that might be because I listened to it at 3 times speed. The story is about this gate that appears and takes over governance of the city, and you have to queue at the gate in order to get all sorts of things approved, including there is one character trying to get surgery to remove a bullet, and he can't seem to get that approved. Also, at a certain point, the gate closes, shuts down, and people are still waiting in the queue trying to get their lives sorted out. There's a lot of misinformation going on, doctoring of the truth. It's a really interesting look at how quickly things could turn to shit. So in that regard, it's quite disturbing. But it's also quite short, and overall, I didn't connect that much with the characters. So I gave it 3 stars overall. It was okay. If that's a topic that you think is interesting, you'd probably want to give this a read. Then I listened to the audiobook of Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. This is a murder mystery set in this school for gifted teenagers. 50 years ago, there was a murder at this school, and we have this girl there learning to be a detective who is interested in solving this crime, and then more murders start to happen. I felt like this book took quite a long time to get going because there are a lot of characters that it's trying to introduce, and then just as it started getting going, it finished without really revealing anything, which drove me mad. I am definitely going to be continuing the series because I want to know what happened, but I was surprised that not much happened in this first book of the series. Then I read Rainbow Sprinkles, the first volume of the Ice Cream Man graphic novel. I did quite like the art, and I quite like the story. This is a bunch of horror short stories, all with this ice cream man featured in each one. Each story I actually quite enjoyed, but overall I felt like I don't understand what's happening with this ice cream man, and it made me feel like I was missing something. I'm not sure that I actually was, but when I got to the end, like, I enjoyed the reading experience, but I got to the end and I thought, did I even understand this? Then I read The Painted Man by Peter V. Brett. This is the first book in the Demon Cycle series, and after reading this, I am excited to continue the series, although I will say the pacing in this was quite strange. In the beginning, it went into a lot of detail about these young teenagers as they find their place in this world where there are demons that come out at night, and the humans use these wards or these rune type symbols to build magical barriers to protect themselves from the demons. But then once we got out of the part where they were children, things started rushing quite a lot, and I felt like the characters were no longer as well developed, and I felt like the climax of the story was a little bit disappointing. So I really love the world. I do think there's a lot of potential in this series, and I'm hoping that Peter V. Brett got better at execution as he goes through the series. I just think it had a lot of cool ideas that it could have done better. Then we come to volume 1 of this Avril Levine graphic novel series. So basically this is a story about this young girl who struggles with her life. Her parents are always fighting. She doesn't have a lot of friends in school, and so she imagines that she can talk to Avril Levine in order to cope with her feelings. But then when she's struggling, she sees this ad to buy a box that will give her 5 wishes. This weird little demon turns up offering to give her 5 wishes. He's a jerk. And then it just follows along with how her wishes go wrong, because of course wishes always go wrong, don't they? I did quite like the art style. I think this guy is really cute. I think it investigated some really important themes, but I don't know that Avril Levine was really important for this story other than marketing. And as I said, volume 2 didn't have a decent ending at all, and that was very disappointing. Then I re-listened to the audiobook of Every Heart a Doy by Shauna Maguire. This is the first book in the Wayward Children series, which is a series about children who find these doors into other worlds and then, for whatever reason, end up back in our boring normal world and have to learn how to deal with reality again. So the Home for Wayward Children is basically this boarding school where they can all live together and support each other. Unfortunately, in this first book, there is a murder mystery that is also going on. I do really like this series, although the second and fourth books in the series were my favorite because those are ones where we actually follow the story of someone finding their door and going into their magical worlds. The bits in the school I don't seem to enjoy as much, but I do think the concept is really cool, and I'm looking forward to listening to the audiobooks for the rest of the series. Then I listened to the audiobook of Cedi by Courtney Summers. This is the story of a young girl whose sister dies, and then she goes off to try and get revenge on the person that she thinks killed her sister. The story is also told through podcasts, as this guy who runs this podcast tries to find out what's happened to this missing girl. Personally, I didn't think the podcast added a lot to the story. I did quite enjoy reading this, although I didn't think the podcast aspect actually added that much to the story. And then the ending was just so unsatisfactory. And I actually had to go back because I thought I'd missed something. I went back in the audiobook and re-listened to the last 2 chapters, thinking there must be a real ending in here somewhere, but there was not. Okay, so we're finally up to the 4-star books, which is the best section. I listened to the audiobook of All Rights Reserved by Gregory Scott Katsolis. This is a story set in this dystopian where when you turn 15, you get this cuff attached to your wrist that tracks everything you say and any gestures you make, and then charges you for that communication, and the money goes to the rights holders. So there's a lot of inequality. The rights holders are really rich, everybody else is living in poverty. Also, most information is restricted in the same way, so people don't have a lot of information about what's going on. I thought it was a really interesting world that's been created and a really interesting look at copyright and inequality. I will say the ending let the story down a little bit, but I am excited to read the second book in the series, and I hope that that will wrap things up a little bit better. Then I also listened to the audiobook of Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. This is a doctor's story of his experience with people that are in the part of their life where they're essentially preparing to die and having to deal with a lot of health issues, and a health industry that's just focusing on keeping them alive without necessarily focusing on the quality of life. So I think this is a really important book for people to read. That's what I was told, and I think it's right. Probably as you yourself are getting older, or if anyone you love is getting older, just to think about what's more important, quantity or quality. It's definitely a part of life where sometimes you might just want to focus on quality rather than extending some kind of horrible experience. It's not necessarily a nice thing to think about, but it's a reality we're probably all going to face at some point. I mean, I like to believe that the scientists are going to sort their shit out and make it so we can live forever, but sometimes scientists let us down. Then I read the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. This was the group book for the Tome Infinity Readathon, and I have to say, I found this really slow going, but in the end, the way that it all came together, for me, totally redeemed this book, and I'm really excited to continue the series. This is a dystopian future where people have developed this extra sense where they can sense the world around them, and some people are able to use the Earth's power to like create earthquakes and volcanoes and do all sorts of other cool magical stuff. But these people who can do this are also very feared, and they get a lot of blame for the horrible things that are going on in the world. And so most of them are enslaved or exiled. One of the perspectives in this book is told from the second person, so it's always referring to you do this, you do that. In its defense, in the end, there is a reason for that, and so I think it was justified, but it can be a bit weird to read. This was a bit of a struggle, but I totally think it was worth it. Then I also read Bird Box by Josh Malerman. I've already returned this to the library, and before I read this, I had watched the Netflix series previously. This is a creepy story where people start seeing something and they will suddenly get very violent and kill themselves in a violent way and hurt anybody else around them. So people have started locking themselves up in their houses and covering their eyes up when they go out. And we're following this main woman named Mallory, both as this situation initially starts and also in the future where she's trying to get these 2 children with her to safety. I do think that the Netflix series and the book are not exactly the same, but they do capture the same feeling It was very creepy. I read it at night when I felt like I was trapped in the house and there was something outside, which is definitely the kind of creepy atmosphere you want to read this book in, but it's not so good if you live alone and you then have to try and go to sleep. So keep that in mind. Then I listened to the audiobook of Only Human, which was the third book in the Themis Files, and I thought it was a really wonderful conclusion. Each book in this series goes in a direction that you didn't expect, which I guess for some people might be a disappointment, but I found it really interesting. I love the themes that this story explores about what humanity really is. And of course, what really made this series amazing is the audiobooks. This is a full cast audiobook narration and the acting is amazing. I can't even imagine what the experience of reading this book physically would be like, because the audiobook became such an integral part of the story to me, because the story is also told through video transcripts and interview transcripts. So in the audiobook, it's like you're listening to things as they actually happen, or like you're hearing from the characters exactly what they think happened. I guess I should tell you what the story is about. In the first book, this young girl falls into a hole and finds herself on this giant hand, and then they realize that this hand could not possibly have been made on Earth, and then they start finding the rest of the robot parts. But by the last book, a lot has happened and the whole scope of the story has changed. But at the same time, the story is still very focused on the personal experiences of the different people involved. Then I read this children's book, Maui and Other Maori Legends. So this is a book that just means a lot to me from my childhood. It's basically a bind up of all these different stories of Maui, all these different legends. And I really love the art. Here's Maui catching the sun. I just think, I mean, how can you really rate Maori legends? I just love the art. I think that it does a really good job of telling these different stories, and I really enjoyed my experience of reading it. So in the end, I had to give it 5 stars. Then we have 2 more 5 stars, and that is Descender 4 and Descender 5. So this one's called Orbital Mechanics, and this one was called Rise of the Robots. There is 1 more volume of this Descender graphic novel series for me to read, and I'm really excited to finish things off. This is a story about a world where humans are all out across the universe, and then these big robots come and just destroy a bunch of human cities, kill off a bunch of humans, and then in retaliation, the humans start just culling all the robots. And so we've got this robots versus humans war going on. Amongst all of this, we've got this companion robot called Tim, who has been the companion to this young boy on this moon. Then he wakes up. Everybody on the planet is gone or dead. He doesn't know what's happened, and he is working with a bunch of different characters trying to work out what caused this initial robot attack and find a resolution. I just think it does such a good job of making you feel empathy for both the humans and the robots. I love the robots, just they touch my heart. I just love some of them so much. And the humans are okay too. I think this is one of my favorite graphic novel series, so if you're struggling to find good graphic novel series and you like science fiction, then this is a series I would definitely recommend. So that was all the books that I read in September. Overall, I was pretty happy with my reading month. Even though I read a large number of 2 stars, I did manage to tick off a lot of books that I've been wanting to read for a while, and I also did read some books that I really loved, so it balances out. I did feel like this was a bit of a stressful reading month because some of the books took me a lot longer to read than I was hoping, and I'm a bit sad that I didn't get to all the books on my September TBR, but again, life happens. If you have read any of the books that I talked about today, I would love to talk with you about them down in the comments, or let me know if you're planning to read any of them soon. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.